A Shalom Akim Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. And salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwatim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to go through this. I wanted to go through the word sacrifice, and essentially how your sacrifice also would benefit others, right? And I kind of wanted to take a look at certain particular sacrifices within the the Levitical priesthood and how those particular sacrifices also benefit the priests, right? And although we're not in those times of actually sacrificing animals and having those having that type of substance, although we are the sacrifice that we are now, using our living bodies, right, which I'll get later on, I kind of wanted to do and equate what the Israelites did back in the ancient times and kind of parallel it to how we perform a sacrifice and how that sacrifice also benefits others, right? So I want to start off here with the word sacrifice, right, and the etymology. So I want to read it through, and I sincerely hope and pray that this lesson is edifying, right? So sacrifice here, it says the offering of something, especially something to a deity as an expression of thanks, devotion, penitence, surrender, to give up, suffer to be lost for the sake of something else, offer a sacrifice, make offerings to a deity, right? So all these, although that we know pursuant to Psalms, the 96th chapter, that the other nations and their gods are idols, and they're not real, they also had manners and ways that they required a sacrifice, right? So for example, like Molech, that required a particular kind of style of sacrifice, right? And you still see that playing out in different terms today, right? But although that's not part of our culture, I wanted to go through the Levitical priesthood and show how during that time we had particular styles of sacrifices, right, which was more pleasing to the Lord, and essentially how that sacrifice was also beneficial to the priests, right, beneficial to other Israelites, right? Here it says to offer sacrifice, make offerings to a deity. It says offer a sacrifice to a deity, perform sacrificial rites. It says lower down, it says performing priestly functions or sacrifices. It says making sacred. So sacra, that's where you get the word sacred rites, sacred. And then it says fachir, means to make do. So essentially to make sacred. That's basically what the word actually means, right? So so it's in general sense the act of giving up a desirable thing for a higher object or to a more pressing claim, right? Something given up for the sake of another, right? So so let me go here. So I want to just read through, get something in regards to peace offerings. So what exactly is a peace offering? So I chose this sacrifice in particular because it also benefited, the priests as well, right? So so here it says a peace offering is a voluntary sacrifice for the thanksgiving, fulfilling a vow, or expressing goodwill. It says distinct because it created a meal of fellowship between the Most High and priests and the worshiper, symbolizing wholeness, communing after acceptable portions. It says fat, kidneys, liver lobe were burned to the Lord. It emphasized joyful relationship and gratitude, right? So Jake had a habit of because we're seen as a nation that's ungrateful, right? Because we don't remember the things the Lord did for us, right? So, and that's a common sentiment that you go through when you read Deuteronomy, because that's why certain laws were also important when you think about it. Like for example, when you have gleaning grapes, when you have gleaning grapes, that practice, you don't glean all the essentially the corners and the different portions of your land. You leave a little bit, for the poor, the stranger, the widow, the fatherless, because at that, when it was essentially also a way to remember those who were less fortunate, because when we went into the land, the different tribes, as opposed to the tribe of Levi, they received a portion of actual, portion of land, right? They were allocated a physical portion as opposed to the Levites, right? The Levites, their charge or their duty was to execute the priestly functions and execute the priestly office, right? So performing sacrifices, burning incense, teaching the law. So that was essentially their charge, right? So here it says, it was a central feature of a communal feast, as joyful celebration of restored fellowship, right? So it was essentially, a sacrifice of thanksgiving, right? To express a certain sentiment of gratitude. So I wanted to read a little bit about this in Leviticus. So this is chapter 7, verse 28, and it says in the NLT, "Then the Lord Yahweh said unto Moses, Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present a peace offering to the Lord, bring part of it as a gift to the Lord. Present it to the Lord with your hands as a special gift to the Lord, and bring the fat of the animal together with the breast, and lift up the breast as a special offering to the Lord." And then it says, "Then the priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast will belong to Aaron and his descendants." And it says, "Give the right thigh of your peace offering and the priest as a gift." The right thigh must always be given to the priest who offers the blood and the fat of the peace offering. For I have reserved the breast of the special offering and the right thigh of the sacred offering for the priest. It is a permanent right of Aaron and his descendants to share in the peace offerings brought by the people of Israel. This is their rightful share. The special gifts presented to the Lord have been reserved for Aaron and his descendants from time they were set apart to serve the Lord as priests, right? So for them to actually serve this particular duty, the Lord received his sacrifice, right? The parts of the animal were burnt, and Aaron and his descendants, the priests, they would have their portion. So they had the breast and then they had the thigh, right? So just to show, because during this time, like I said before, the physical, the priests themselves, the Levites, they did not have that physical inheritance, right? So imagine, when you think about it, a tribe, so the other 11 tribes actually had their own abundance. So it would have been, they might have had pomegranates, they had grain, they had cows, they had sheep, they had goats, all that is equated and what you would call substance, today. That's a land. You had vineyards. You know what you can do with a vineyard. You can, mash grapes to make your wine. You can export the wine, and then you also need laborers as well to be able to perform these certain functions, right? So the priests didn't have that luxury, because the priests, their inheritance and their duty was to execute and perform these different what's the word I'm looking for? Perform these different functions to make sure that these sacrifices, these certain tabernacle duties, right, which translated into the temple, these certain duties were being taken care of, right? So they didn't have that. I don't want to say they didn't have that luxury, but they didn't have the that portion, that time, right? Because their charge was to specifically just focus on these particular things, right? So let me go to 1 second. I think it says that in Numbers. This is Numbers chapter 18, verse 20. And it says, "And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Aaron," and it says, "Thou shalt have no inheritance in the land, neither thou shalt have any part among them. I am thy part of thine inheritance among the children of Israel. Behold, I have given the children of Levi a tenth in Israel for an inheritance for the service which they serve, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation." Right. So that was their charge. Their charge because, the different tribes, going back what I said earlier in regards to the time during Joshua, when we kicked out those different heathens, and we're supposed to remove their odious works, and we're not supposed to give our sons and daughters and to these different ites, these different nations, and we're supposed to be separate. Their charge, they did not receive that physical portion. So their portion, like I was saying earlier, was supposed to actually execute those priestly functions and priestly duties, which is, you were they're very, very busy, taking care of those things. So the Lord had it in a way for them to actually partake, and actually not only partake, but also for them to benefit, right? So I'm reading this, and just to get an understanding of how things were done in the physical sense, that sacrifice, still benefited the Aaron and the Levites, and their essentially their families, right? Because they didn't have that portion, right? So what would happen is, okay, sacrifice gets performed, right? But the Levites, they still benefited from it, right? They still had to eat, they still had to, but they had a job to do, right? So I'm kind of just reading this in the physical sense, right? So let me go to Deuteronomy. Okay, I just wanted to read another example. This is Deuteronomy 26, verse 1, and it says, "And it shall be when thou come into the land which Lord Yahweh thy power giveth thee for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwellest therein, and thou shalt take the first of all the fruit of the earth, which thou shalt bring into thy land, that the Lord Yahweh thy power giveth thee, and shalt put it in a basket, and thou shalt go unto the place of the Lord thy power shall choose to place his name there. And thou shalt go unto the priests that shall be in those days, say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy power, that I am come unto the country which the Lord sware unto our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thine hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy power." Right. So this is also another the offering, you can say, first fruits, where the Israelites, they would provide a certain physical portion, right? And they would give this also unto the priest, right? So this was also to help maintain the welfare of the priest as well, right? And you might be thinking, okay, at this point, why am I reading this? Because I'm reading this because all these different offerings and sacrifices, they also benefited another. So I'm reading this also in the sense of thinking about, in the sense that, pursuing to Romans, and I want to get this right now, we are now the sacrifice. So because now we are the sacrifice, we don't have those different, we're not in the land. We don't have the luxury of having wonderful pomegranate trees and dates and figs, and or maybe some brothers might have, like, a little vineyard, right? But we know are under curses. We know that we have to go to the enemy for the want of all things. However, to have we can still have a pleasing sacrifice in the sense of, there are certain maybe gifts that you might have that might be able to help another, right? You still have certain talents, you still have, maybe certain luxuries or even some connections or whatever it might be to actually be able to assist another, right? Some brothers, for example, you're very, they might be very good listeners. They might have that style, not that style, I should say. They might have that gift. They're very, very charitable. They're very, whatever it is, right? Your gift. Every brother has a different kind of gift, right? Some elders, like, they're very good with the history and so on and so forth, medicine, right? That's to show you that sacrifice. Now we are the sacrifice. Like I want to read right now, is benefiting another, right? So this is Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of the Most High, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto the Most High, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and the will and perfect will of the Most High. Right. So in these times, we don't have to do all these things. We don't have that substance. We don't have that luxury, right? But at the same time, the essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? The sentiment or the sacrifice, that sacrificial mindset is still the same, right? Because you might have to give up certain things to make yourself a bit more profitable. Like you might have had in the world, like I read in verse 2, there might have been certain habits or certain, for example, uh, um, things that were kind of essentially making you more unprofitable. So, to be able to, clean ourselves up and, subject a lot of those filthy lusts and habits and behaviors and so on and so forth, in order to actually present a more pleasing sacrifice, right? If that makes sense, right? So you might have had different, like in the world, they call them vices, right? Those vices could have been, hampering you to be able to perform, a more pleasing sacrifice. So essentially, you can able to actually be able to maximize more of your gifts, right? Um, since I mentioned that, uh, it's what's it? Man's gift. I think it's in prop. Just bear with me. Let me look for this. Okay, this is Proverbs chapter 18, verse 16, and it says, "A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him among before great men." Hold on, let me see if I can get that in another translation real quick. NLT perhaps. Okay, this is in the NLT in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 16. It says, "Giving a gift can open doors. It gives access to important people," right? So, having, particular gifts, it can actually be able to, open certain doors, right? So that, going back into the point about, being more profitable, right? So essentially, that sacrifice. So maybe, you had to spend a little bit more time, cultivating a specific, kind of gift, whatever it is, right? And you're able to actually use that gift, utilize it to be able to help the body, be able to, provide a more pleasing sacrifice, if that makes sense, right? Because we are essentially the sacrifice. You might have had, or not to, maybe take it too deep, maybe to be very, very simple with it, maybe you're just somebody who's just a very, very, you know, good listener. You have those different skill sets, right? So, having those things, knowing those things, and being able to utilize those things are very, important also, to be able to actually have a more pleasing, you know, um, sacrifice, essentially to have more of a sweet smelling savor unto the Lord, right? Because what do our people do? And you think about it as well, you know, on the flip side, our people use a lot of their gifts and their talents to push wickedness, to promote evil, and essentially it's not a sweet smelling savor. It's more of like a smoke in the Heavenly Father's nose when you really think about it, right? Because they have talents. Our people have talents. They have gifts. You know, like I'll just use the music for example. They have those capabilities, but what do they do with their capabilities? To be able to push, certain kinds of rhetoric, certain kinds of vibrations that essentially dims the vibration of our people. It actually does more harm to them as opposed to benefiting them. Our people don't really benefit, you know, by hearing certain kinds of messages that cause them to transgress against the Lord, right? That's not a pleasing sacrifice, right? David provided a pleasing sacrifice when you think about it towards King Saul because he was very profitable, or he knew how to play the harp to essentially calm down Saul's nerves, right? So I'm kind of using that in a sense to show that, your gifts and your talents are very, very important. What skills that you have are very, very important because it actually can benefit, the body, right? So let me see. Let me go to, hold on. Oh, that's not Deuteronomy. Is it Ephesians? This is Ephesians 5, verse 1. And it says, "Be therefore followers of the Most High as dear children, and walk in love, and as a Mashiach Yahushai also loved us, and hath given himself for us as an offering, as sacrifice to the Most High, for a sweet smelling savor. But fornication and uncleanness or uncovetousness, let it not be named among you as becoming saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. For this we know, no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of the Mashiach Yahushai and of the Most High Yahweh." Right. So, this is how this is the flip side of how our people present their sacrifices, because they're not presenting it to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, because that's not a sweet smelling savor. That's more of a smell. That's more of a filthy stench in the Heavenly Father's nose. Because what do those sacrifices do? Those are going back to the etymology, like I read earlier. That's going up into the nostrils. You can equate it like that, into the false idols that they worship and they pay homage to. Because the Lord didn't require that type of sacrifice from us. It doesn't require that kind of sacrifice of, deleting your children, or putting a dress on your sons, or painting your fingernails, or all those different methods of sacrifice that they do is pleasing to another deity, which transgresses against the Lord, right? So that is the complete opposite of how our people behave, right? So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to show the priestly functions, show how the sacrificial method, in a sense, is still playing out with today, just as opposed to actually bringing a physical sacrifice. We are now the sacrifice, right? So, and this is also I guess an exhortation about brothers having different gifts, and their gifts are also important, for the benefit of the body and benefit of the believers, right? So I think I'll end off with this last one in Matthew, actually, because we give credit and glory to the Lord, right? So this is Matthew 5:16, and it says, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven," right? So we give glory to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, of course, because he's the one that gave us these different gifts and these different talents, right? To be able for the essentially, I think it's Paul that said this, for the edification of the saints, right? To roughly paraphrase, right? So it's all for the benefit of the elect at the end of the day, right? The gift of prophecy, interpretation of tongues, being able to, help, things like different that, things of that nature, or even something as, I don't want to say it as simple, but something, that could just be, being a good listener, right? That and also serves as a benefit as well, giving whether your time or whatever, right? That's also a pleasing sacrifice, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, as always, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.